Thank you for joining us on Silently Bleeding Hope for the Pastor's Wife. Many pastors' wives serve faithfully while carrying burdens few people ever see. Today, Jenny shares her story of walking through ministry, injustice, her husband's serious health battles, and how God met her in the silence. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Jenny, for those meeting you for the first time, can you share a little about you and your family and how you became a pastor's wife?
Of course. Yes. So I was raised in a Christian home, and my father was a deacon. So, very involved in the church. So from the very beginning, we were always at church, and ministry was kind of a part of my growing up years. So we were involved in ministry from a very young age, and my parents made it a priority to send me to a Christian school. And I went from grades kindergarten through senior in high school, and that's where I met my husband. We were high school sweethearts. We met in theater. After graduation, my husband had gone on to college and seminary, and we got married after I graduated. I jumped right into ministry from day one. So
Jenny, when did you first realize the calling of being a pastor's wife was going to cost you more than you expected?
when we were in our first church, my in my growing up years with my parents, our senior pastor, an affair, his secretary. It was very traumatizing to me. I never ever thought that I would ever go into ministry based on that, because I saw the hurt and the pain that it caused his family and the church, and my parents in particular had to step up a little bit in leading the church through that hurt. Then when I met my husband, we had started to date. That was something that was important to him. And he mentioned the fact that he had felt that God had called him into ministry. And he asked if I felt the calling to be a pastor's wife, to go into some sort of ministry. And I had to kind of take a step back. And I told him I wasn't quite so sure. And we kind of I I took a little time to just think and pray about that, because I'd never thought about that being a calling. I just thought you marry someone and whatever they do, you do your thing, they do their thing. But that's not the case with this particular calling. I eventually began to realize that the gifts and the talents that God had given me and the passion for people was a calling, and it was something that I could come alongside him and use my gifts and abilities in ministry just as much as he could. And we began to date, and the thumbs up. Jumped right in.
I love that. Jenny, you'd shared with me that your husband has faced some serious health issues while carrying the load of ministry. What has that been like for you?
Very, very difficult. It was something that we didn't anticipate. When we married, we jumped gung ho into serving and youth ministry, and we were active. And he is Energizer Bunny on steroids. He's very, very full of life and vigor. And so the health thing started about probably 12 years ago, when he had a senior pastorate and was so excited to be preaching God's word every week. That was something that he really, really felt that the Lord had called him from the age of 12 to do. And so he started to notice a pain in his jaw. It would come out of nowhere, ended up being called trigeminal neuralgia, which is the nerve in that jaw line. And if you can imagine, as a pastor trying to preach God's word, trying to concentrate enough, and then having this come out of nowhere, a jolt, like the worst dental pain you can ever imagine. They even call it the suicide disease, because people that get this disease, just there's nothing that will touch it, no medication, and you try everything. He was getting shots in his jaw and everything else. It was just becoming increasingly worse. We lived in Michigan at that time, and any kind of cold air or anything would just really just debilitate him. The opportunity came for him to have surgery on that nerve. And so he had the surgery, and then it kind of jarred a different response for him. And this isn't the same for everybody. So, someone that has this condition, it doesn't always happen like it happened to him, where he had whole right side became paralyzed.
Mm.
And he ended up at Mary Free Bed with rehab center, and they were trying to, get that right side to wake up and to work again. In the meantime, we'd been at the church for a couple of years. Things had been going great when he was healthy, but there was a couple of men that just were, everybody wants to give their advice and the solution for everything, and it just became like a criticism rather than compassion.
Mm.
We started to get this feeling that they were unhappy, the fact that he was like, it seemed like he was going from one thing to the next. And at first it started out, they were supportive, and most of the church was super supportive. It was just a couple of rumblings and men that were on the board that were kind of questioning whether or not he should be pastoring. This was heartbreaking, and we started feeling a lot of pressure as far as hiding the fact that he was sick, or if he had to go to a doctor's appointment or whatever, we just wouldn't make a big deal about it. Everybody else is asking for their prayer needs, but we were stuffing ours. We have 7 kids, and at the time, they were ages probably 2 to 12, 5 boys, 2 girls. They would see it, and we would basically tell them, and I hate to even admit this, but we would tell them, please just let's keep this at home. I don't, I was protective of him, and I just don't want this to get out. Let's not mention that, dad was at the ER yesterday or whatever. We just became kind of reclusive in that sense, but we're very open people, and very loving to people. We love people, and we would welcome any issues that they had, but we were finding that we were just becoming afraid to be open about ours.
So you are silently bleeding.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I saw the title of your ministry, I thought, oh wow, does that ever resonate?
Yeah. Wow. How did this illness that your husband was facing and the way the church people were treating you guys, not all of them, but the few,
Yes. Yes.
how did that affect you emotionally and spiritually?
It became really hard. We're both of us are very open people, and we don't tend to shy away from that. So this was going against our personality, just trying to be so secretive. And it hurt because my husband's the type of person that will drop anything for anyone, and be there for anybody. And it doesn't matter the circumstance, but yet we didn't have that same support system. It almost felt like we were supposed to be above that, in ministry somehow excluded us from that. And again, these are my feelings. I'm not saying that that's truth, but these are definitely what I felt. I was trying to I'm a homeschooling mom, so I was trying to homeschool the kids, and I started getting involved in everything at church, just to make us indispensable, or to try to cover up any slack that he had to have. He had enough on his plate. It was really difficult for me. I started to get closed off a little bit, kind of bitter. At this time, my mother-in-law had moved in with us because she was battling breast cancer. And so I'm facing, all of these things. And I was starting to get kind of yeah, a little sarcastic, kind of just, but trying to also keep the atmosphere of the home happy. And my children, I was super protective of them. I didn't want them to be bitter, but yet I was. But I was making sure they're okay. And the pressures of a lot of what they were facing, I wanted them to be open and honest with me, but yet I wasn't being open and honest with them. And I know they picked up on that. I was fearful, like going to church and things. I would, on the outside, you'd never know it. I was, bubbly and everything, but I was also fearful on the inside because I just didn't know what people thought, and it became such a, so consuming to me what everybody is thinking, and I was so tired of having to answer medical questions and just things, and so it just was like, oh, he's doing all right, and it just became really difficult to walk through for me. But I didn't realize it at the time. You kind of just go with the flow, and you kind of just, are in survival mode. And then the car crash happened to me.
Oh,
So yeah, so as we're going through all these things with all the, with my husband and with my mother-in-law, my husband, after he had the surgery, he was actually, and after he got the feeling back on his right side, he was doing better. And then he started to not be able to eat. Like
Mm.
everything was just not didn't taste good, and he was losing weight like crazy, and he was getting sick every time he ate. We were trying to figure that out, but he went on a missions trip to Haiti, and while he was gone, my son and I, we were in the car, and it was a beautiful afternoon spring day, but out of nowhere, like life sometimes does, from behind, we were we were struck by a drunk driver going 3 times the speed limit, and the car flipped 3 times, and we ended up upside down. I just felt like, wow, one more thing, I just
Jenny,
was,
did you feel like, God, where are you?
oh yeah, I thought, okay, this is not fair. I'm the only one that's, now this is my flesh, but I'm the only one holding this family together. You cannot take me out. This is so unfair. And my son, thankfully, it was like he was in a bubble. He was not harmed in any way, but my back was fractured in 3 places. And I was in so much pain, and I think emotional too. That was just the beat all. And my husband, of course, he was in Haiti, and he was so upset because he was at home. Eventually, when he did get home, I was in a brace, a turtle brace, for like, I think it was 8 months. It was
Hmm.
through the summer. It was so hot. The Lord healed those bones. I didn't have to have surgery. I had to wear that thing, when I was in a lot of pain for the first 3 or 4 months. It was horrible. My kids really jumped in. I have a daughter that's a nurse now, and I say that God used that because she was a nurse to all of us that were in the household. I didn't realize my kids were watching. They were watching us go through all this. And yet my husband would still get up and preach. I'd get up and get everybody ready to go in my turtle clamp shell to church. The Lord was using that to show them that, we were still being faithful. I don't think they realized the internal turmoil that I was going through, but they did say that just that faithful steadfastness, despite all the circumstances, it meant a lot to them.
Jenny, what kept you from walking away from God and the ministry?
Well, I will tell you that my moments of just wanting to run away and hide, I felt like so abandoned. The Lord would place certain people into our path that just would encourage us, and it would come out of nowhere. It would just be some people in church, that just became dear to our family, and he would provide in ways that were just beyond us. And I would always capitalize on those type of things to my kids and show them, God is taking care of us. We've got to recognize that he sees us. And I believed that. I did. There was still that hardness that wouldn't be uh, addressed in my own life, in my own walk. I just kept stuffing those feelings, to make sure that I was making a point for everybody else. I wasn't trying to put on a show. I was just genuinely trying. I saw God and I knew he was there, but for everyone else, there were times that I did want to walk away. I was hurt that all we wanted to do was serve the Lord. And one of the things that in my bitterness, would say was, we didn't ask to be the poster child for pain and suffering. And
Mhm.
I just felt like I didn't want all this attention. It was so public. Not that we were in a huge church at that point, but we had different ministries and different people would hear different things. It was like, oh man, something's always happening to the kitchen. I was embarrassed and I was angry that we would have to go through all this. So I spouted that one day. I didn't ask to be the poster child for pain and suffering. And then it hit me that we're not, that God sent his son to be the poster child for pain and suffering. And if anybody could understand, and if anybody knew what we were feeling, I knew that Jesus did. and I could hold on to that. I became a researcher. I became as far as finding a support group for my husband for his trigem. And then when he got beyond that, he was diagnosed. He has a feeding tube because of pancreatitis. They found that after my car accident. He's had a feeding tube for 10 years. He still has one and still struggles with pancreatitis. I call it like his thorn in the flesh. Now I can look at some of these things that we've gone through, and we are more compassionate and we are more understanding of people and their trials, and being faithful during those, despite those type things, is so important.
It's so hurtful, Jenny, when as the pastor's wife, you're there for the people. 3 o'clock in the morning, you get a call, you head to the hospital, and you don't judge them for being sick or having this or that and all these issues or marital issues. And then when you come up against a health issue, where's the church?
Right, right.
And it hurts. It's hard. And I know you're not the only one who's faced this. And I'm so sorry that you've had to walk through this, but I'm grateful that God is using this in you and your husband's lives. And you're out there and you're loving God, you're loving people, and you're sharing your story to help other pastors' wives know they're not alone. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Yeah. For so long, I hated our story. I hated it. And and I had no idea what God was up to, and I thought, how is he ever going to use this? The Lord opened the doors for us. We were in a season after my husband was asked to resign from the church when we were going through all these things. I was out of my brace. So once they found out that he had chronic pancreatitis, a couple of men on the board really insisted that he's just too sick to pastor. It felt like a slap in the face. It was just one more thing. We didn't have any savings. We had a previous ministry that we had a house that hadn't been sold yet. We were living in a parsonage. So we were basically homeless and with 7 kids, and 2 of the kids were in college at that point. We had to ask my mother-in-law to move back to her house in Ohio, which she was in remission, thank the Lord. But it was like our whole world was just uprooted because as if we weren't suffering enough. And it's not like, we didn't want to make it about us. That's why we kept it like as private as we could. It was almost like we were being accused of being attention seekers or something like that. And it just was unreal. That's when God stepped in, and he provided this other church in the area that had heard about it, and they had an empty parsonage, and it was just perfect for us, and they didn't want any payment. We could live there as long as we wanted with no expectations of attending their church or anything like that. They had a clothing ministry. It was a tiny church that was really struggling in the community, so they could have used the money, of renting out this parsonage, but they chose to sacrifice it to us and help us get back on our feet. And it was just amazing. And then we got plugged into another church. And for a pastor and family to walk into a church and not be the pastor is so different.
Yeah.
And I remember telling the kids they said, "What do we do?" when they ask what your dad does. I said, "You tell him he's a pastor. We're just looking for a church right now." Because he had no intention of not pastoring, but we were in a season where we just needed to heal.
Mm.
And God gave us that. He placed some men around my husband and some women around me. And it was just looking back, I love our story now. I I'm just like, God, you gave us every need that we had in that little parsonage, that little church. We could get any type of clothing. If we needed any food, they had a food bank, and we had to use it sometimes. Provided a job for my husband that he hated, but he did because he knew that yeah. And I was going to tell you this, that there was a time where he just was very depressed, and I wasn't quite sure. I was I was trying to be the optimistic one, and I wanted to just yank him out of that bed. And I talked to this wise, godly woman, and she said, "You need to tell him that you need him." And I'm just stubborn enough because I just didn't want to admit that I needed him. But when I told him that, that changed everything. It's like he needed to hear those words from me. I need you.
Mm.
And because he needed to feel needed. And then he went and worked at an inner city as a substitute teacher in an inner city school. And he worked at an Amazon warehouse. He did whatever he could do to bring in some money for us to be able to make it. And we didn't know what the future was going to be. But then after 2 years of living in that area, the Lord opened the doors like miraculously. We weren't searching. A pastor, the church that we're at now, called my husband, and they had mutual connections. And he said, I've pastored here for 24 years. And he says, I have heart problems. He says, I need to retire so that I can, live out the rest of my years with my family. And he says, if anybody understands health issues, I do. And he says, and this church does, because they've walked with us through this heart issue that I've had. And he said, I'd like for you to come and candidate. And a week before we came, that pastor passed away. And so we weren't even sure whether the church would want us to come and candidate or not. We knew right away that they were so loving, and so they knew. We never told them our story, but this pastor had shared with them before he passed. God was directing us to a healthy church that would love on us, and they have. We've been here for 6 years, and they have just. My husband was just in the hospital for three weeks with his pancreas. They were so reaffirming and loving, and when he got up to preach this past Sunday after being in the hospital for 3 weeks, the whole auditorium burst into applause.
Oh,
And we had some visitors. We had like about 10 visitors from a church that had shut down. And my husband, said, don't you know they do this for me every time I get up to preach? He was just joking, but of course. But I said, can you imagine what those visitors thought? But no, we were able to share that this is the testimony of this congregation. They're super loving and very supportive.
oh, I love that. They are truly the little church that gave you guys the parsonage for that 2 years, and this church and the people in the church you attended while you guys were
Yes,
not in the pastorate. That's truly the hands and feet of
that
Jesus.
that
I
is that
love
is the
that.
church, absolutely. And my children, thank God, I was so worried what this would do to them, but they are all serving the Lord in one way or another. I have two pastor sons and another that's going to college to be a youth pastor, and the other ones just love the Lord, and they're just plugged in whatever way they can. Or we're a music family. We we use that to get through, quite honestly. We sing as a family. They would sing their hearts out, going through some of the worst days. That's what they would use to cope. And I think that's an important tool. Find what makes you, what speaks to your heart, what the Lord's gifted you with, or what He draws you to. Sometimes it's hiking, or sometimes it's just reading, or something. Fill your mind and your heart with the goodness of God.
Amen. And there's something about worshiping God through the storm. You know,
Absolutely. It's so deeper, it's so much deeper. When I was going through it, I honestly couldn't see it. I couldn't. And now looking back, every God encounter is so special. And I just tear up when I think of just the different people that He has brought that have been so important. And it makes me want to make sure that I'm that person to others too.
I have a feeling you are. So, Jenny, as we're wrapping this up, what would you say to your younger self if you could go back to some of the things you've been through? Not that you need to say what those were, because I know there's a lot more you've been through as well that you've shared with me. But what would you say to your younger self to encourage yourself?
I would say don't give up. There's a brighter future. And I think sometimes when you're in the thick of things and people say that, I didn't believe it. I really was despondent. And also, you're not alone. The little things that people I talked about, um, people that God will place along the path to just get you through one more step. Also, you don't have to be alone. You know, for so long I just chose not to reach out, not to admit that I needed other people. I had been so hurt by people that I just didn't want anything to do with them. But I did realize that there is safety, and there are others that have gone through things that you can glean from. I know that for me, I joined a group for pastors' wives whose husband had been asked to resign, and it was just different areas, and we really bonded and connected. I can still chat with them to this day. It was during COVID, so it was a lot of technical type stuff, but you get to know these people and know that you're not alone, and Satan wants you to feel alone. That's a tool the devil is to make you feel like you're isolated and that you can't trust anyone. But there are kind people. There are organizations that can help, and I did get therapy. You know, I had to definitely sort through my feelings because I stuffed them for so long, and I needed to like draw those out. Once I was in a safe space, I thought, why can't I just get over this? Why am I like pulling this all back out? But it was because I stuffed it away and never dealt with it. But I'm a much better person now that I have.
Oh, I'm so glad. And therapy has helped me as well, for
Yeah.
some of the things I've had to walk through. Because to be honest, if you've been in the ministry any amount of time, you're going to get hurt.
Yes.
There's going to be people that are going to say and do things that are just,
Right.
but God. And then,
Yes.
then on the other hand, there are people that just want to love you and lift you up and encourage you. And Jenny's story reminds us that faith is not proven by ease, but by obedience in the hard and hidden places. If you are a pastor's wife, my friend, and you're carrying more than anyone knows, God sees you, He hears you, and He is still at work, even in the silence. I'm going to leave our email address down below. If you would like to reach out for prayer or and encouragement, email me. I will get back with you as quickly as I can. Thank you so much for watching Silently Bleeding Hope for the Pastor's Wife. I'll see you on the next video, my friend. God bless. Bye bye.